adventure. You're on Pipeman on W4CY Radio.
Wake up, America! It's time for the adventures of Pipeman on W4CY.com, West Palm Beach's #1 internet radio station. Here's your host, the Pipeman.
This is Pipeman here on the Adventures of Pipeman W4CY Radio, and I'm very excited about our next guest, who I think is one of the coolest dudes in music, because he's just all about the music, okay? And that's rare nowadays. And there's some badass music that you're going to have to check out that's new. So let's welcome to the show, Parris from AGGROS. How are you?
I'm great, Dean. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing phenomenal. You like my background there?
I love it. Now I don't have to hold up the album every 5 minutes.
I know, right? There you go. And I'm actually impressed. I positioned myself so perfectly that it's like I'm part of the graphic.
I know, it's amazing.
So tell us about this new song, Skateboard Fight. First of all, I just want to say right off the bat, too, besides it being a badass song, I love the ode to old school where you're having like a duel with guitars, okay, because it's always cool. And I also love that there were a couple secret little, guest appearances in the video, not as people, but guest appearances that people, I'm thinking I don't even want to tell the listeners what it is, because I want them to watch the video and find it for themselves, kind of like Where's Waldo?
It is kind of a nice surprise. I mean, and it kind of happened that way for myself because, this is the third video from the album. And I kind of wanted all the videos to feel like they were the same night, like some fictional night in my memory. And so each one is kind of a continuation, but I didn't want them to be in the same places. And one of the things that was great about growing up as a kid in New York City was you explored the city on your skateboard or your bike. And you would ride around for hours and hours and hours, and you could go in a different direction every night for years and, discover the city. That's how I did. That's how I discovered hardcore music, was riding my bike or riding my skateboard down to the Lower East Side. And I found this little bar on Avenue A, which was an abandoned neighborhood at the time. Like literally, there were big banners on all the buildings that said "Rent Strike," and all the storefronts. Every storefront on Avenue A was boarded up, except for one Ray's Egg Cream and Veselka, a little restaurant, and one deli. But all the rest of it was boarded up, and there was this one bar called the Park Inn Tavern. And I would just go in there and the guy served me, which was insane, because I was 14. And but there was this punk rock club across the street, and I just saw all these kids accumulating over there. So eventually I just wandered over there, and that's how I discovered it. But I wanted that kind of feeling in the videos, this idea of being out at night, because I don't think I saw the sun, except for in the morning during my entire teens and 20s.
Right.
Because I would sleep until 5, I would go out and at like 9, and then I would get home at like 7 in the morning, and every day for years and years and years. But so I definitely wanted it to be a night vision. And the first 2 videos, I feel like I managed to capture a completely different feeling. But when I was putting together this third video, the very first thing I shot was the guitar duel.
Nice.
Between me and Chuck, because Chuck was in town. He lives in Maine, and he's in a couple of bands, so he's touring quite a bit. And busy guy, and just have to take advantage of when he's around. And he was like, "I'm going to be in town for a day, and I'm playing with Carnivore AD somewhere, and our gig will be over at about midnight. so I could probably meet you at 1:30 or 2 in the morning. And so I said, okay, meet me at the base of the Williamsburg Bridge at 2. You know, and then I would be there waiting with the camera, and maybe, you know, if anybody who I could get to help. And on that night it was my wife, so it was just me and my wife. And then I set up the cameras, and Chuck showed up, and I just had him take out his guitar, and we like faced off. And I said, listen, this is a duel. This is like a fight to the death guitar battle, you know. And then so I set up the camera like over my shoulder, like you'd see a gunfight scene in a Clint Eastwood movie or something. And then Chuck just starts playing his guitar, doing his thing, and smiling and looking at the camera or whatever. And like I stopped the cameras. I was like, no, Chuck, this is a battle. You don't look at the camera. Look at me. You know, this is a duel. And so he got the point of what I wanted. You know, I didn't get a lot of prep time, but it explained it to him. So we shot like the close-ups of the gun battle, and then he came back to town like 2 months later, and that's when we shot the really high-angle shots of the gun battle. And then on a completely other night, we shot the close-ups of the hands. You know, I just did it. I always do it in little increments. So I had, you know, this basically empty palette, but with the guitar duel in there. And nice. I was just driving around. I was shooting on this TV show called Evil, because I'm a camera operator, and we were out shooting out on Staten Island, and I had heard about this Wu-Tang Clan street sign, and I'd never seen it. And I thought, you know, that would be kind of a cool thing to shoot for the video. You know, it's a taste of New York. You know, New Yorkers love their music, and, you know, they pay tribute to other, you know, to New York musicians with these street signs. It's an odd thing. I mean, I guess, you know, in LA they do the stars, and and here we do.
I like
street
signs better.
You know,
it's cooler.
And I didn't realize how many there were. I knew about the Joey Ramone one, and I'd heard about a couple other ones. I'd seen the Duke Ellington one up in Harlem. But so, you know, one night we wrapped on Evil at like 2 o'clock in the morning, and I ran up to the Grips, and I was like, hey man, can I borrow this? Can I borrow a 2K rolling stand and a Century stand and a bunch of Mayfair clamps and a Century you know, all this grip equipment? And they're looking at me like, what do you need that for? I said, I'm going to go shoot something. They were like, we just been shooting for 14 hours. It's, you know, it's 2:30 in the morning. You're going to go out and shoot something? I was like, got to go out when I can. So I went out and I found the Wu-Tang sign, and it was like way higher than any street sign, because it was kind of on a highway. It wasn't on a street corner.
Huh.
And, so that's why I needed these I needed these extra stands. So I had this one stand that went like 20 feet in the air, but I had to attach another stand to the end of that so I can go like another 15 feet higher or something crazy like that. And then I clamped the camera to it and taped it up and hoisted the whole thing up, and cops kept rolling by, and they would stop and look at me like, what's this guy doing? They never bothered me. And I shot that shot. And once I had that Wu-Tang shot, I felt like I had to go and collect all the other ones. So, nice. You know, even though I blew the surprise, it definitely, you get this feeling like I'm traveling through the city and I'm stopping. You know, my friend Terry Stacy, who's a famous cinematographer, he saw the video and he's like, you know, Parris, your video is kind of like a love letter to New York.
I love it. And you didn't blow the whole surprise, because there's also 2 other things there that are my 2 favorites of a certain band. And
me too.
People have to watch for that.
Well, without telling what it is, I'll tell you why I did it the way I did it. Because I didn't show street signs, because oddly enough, there are no street signs dedicated to these 2 members of probably the most popular New York band. You know,
right? How is that even possible?
Because you know, these street signs are lobbied for by fans, and I guess, you know, nobody feels the need to lobby for a band that's sold 100 million records. And
I know, right?
They lobby for the little guys, or the people that they view as the little guys. So, you know, Charlie Parker and Run DMC and people like that all have signs, or people that are proud in their neighborhood. I imagine the Run DMC sign was lobbied for by the people in the neighborhood. But yeah, I felt like, you know, all those, even though I'm not directly influenced by a lot of the artists that I showcase in there, it's just, you know, when you're a New Yorker and you're influenced by all these big artists who are basically your neighbors in a way, so it makes them feel reachable. It just felt like something I wanted to include in the video.
It's definitely a different vibe than LA. As somebody who experienced both in the 80s, both New York and LA, it's like such a different vibe because, well, New Yorkers anyway, like you're saying, it's more of a community and it's more of you're all for each other, where in LA they're all in competition with each other, and it's like totally like that too. And the snobbery sometimes back in the 80s of some of the bands. Ironically, there's a couple that I knew back then that I couldn't stand back then because they thought they were all that in a bowl of cherries. And nowadays they're actually really nice guys because they got, humbled.
a few rungs down the ladder.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, what's odd is like after I started shooting some of the signs, I began to realize that I was actually, how I say that, I feel akin to them because they're kind of like neighbors.
Yeah.
But I realized that there was like a 6th degree of Kevin Bacon situation going on because the first sign I shot was the Wu-Tang sign, and I actually worked with Method Man a couple of times on Blue Bloods. He's a recurring character on the TV show Blue Bloods that I was shooting. So I've shot Method Man.
Nice.
And then the second one I shot was Charlie Parker Street, Avenue B. And I'm a music publisher, and I publish quite a bit of Charlie Parker's music.
Nice.
Which I inherited from my father, who met and did that business with Parker. And then of course the Beastie Boys. As teenagers we were all friends, and Adam Yauk was possibly going to be the bass player of the Chrome Eggs at one point, but he was going away to college up in Bard, and he said he was like, yeah, I'll definitely come down on the weekends and we'll play. But the guys in my band didn't like the idea of somebody being a weekend warrior,
right?
Which is silly. And we also asked Mike Diamond to play drums with us early on. It wasn't like we asked him; it was just talk. Because you're a bunch of kids standing on a street corner, and you're trying to figure things out. And we were like, yeah, maybe Mike can play drums. Oh, let's get Adam. But we actually asked Adam, had a sit down meeting with him in Roger Moret's van.
Wow.
In front, it was me, Roger, and Adam, and Adam was on board 100%. Adam was a big fan of like heavy hardcore music, even though he went off and became a hip hop icon.
So what does it feel like?
One more thing. I'm sorry. One more thing. Run DMC, the Run DMC sign. I directed a Run DMC video.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So anyway, that's that.
What does it feel like, by the way, like being at this stage and looking back and thinking back of when you were a kid on the streets of New York, like just thinking about doing this stuff?
It's very strange. The last video I did is in 2 sections. It's called City Kids, which also relates to what we're talking about. But the second half of the video is of the song is called Ghosts of New York. And to a large extent, I feel like there's not a street corner in New York I can't stand on without feeling, like a little haunted.
Right.
I can't tell you how many times I get off a crowded subway train and like out of the corner of my eye, I see, like Jimmy Gestapo from Murphy's Law. And I don't mean like the guy I see all the time on the street, but I mean like the 16-year-old Jimmy Gestapo. And for a split second, I'm like, oh, there's Jimmy. And of course, it's not him. Or I'll see Eric Casanova, the original singer of the Chrome Eggs, or I'll see the Beastie Boys, at 15 and 16, or any number of the extraordinary people that I was privileged to be friends with at that age. So I definitely feel like there's a little haunting going on all the time because I have so many memories connected to so many places. Every subway stop I get off, every street I walk down, every restaurant I go to, every bar I sit down at, I can think of like when Joe Jackson was sitting in Blanche's and the jukebox hadn't changed in years, and he sat down one afternoon. I was in there, it was just me and Joe Jackson in there, and I was shooting pool, and Joe Jackson was sitting at the bar having a drink, which was nothing unusual. But the songs on the jukebox hadn't changed in years. They were actually singles, And then he's sitting there at the bar, and all of a sudden the record changes, and the song Steppin' Out, his song Steppin' Out, which was a huge hit at the time, came on the jukebox, and he just went, and he looked back at the jukebox, and he looked forward, and he took his drink, and he just like finished it, put it down, he pushed his bar stool back away from the bar, he got up and left, and I never saw him again.
Wow.
But I can't go to Blanche's without thinking about that, or thinking about David Johansen sitting there, or the guys in the Beastie Boys who hung out there all the time, or Dante Ross, who produced the Everlast great album, and so many people that hung out there, and Earl from the Bad Brains used to shoot pool there every day. So all these people were just the background of my life when I was a teenager, and I feel like all that's still there. But I'm still connected with some of them, like Jimmy I see often.
Yeah, it's interesting when you're talking about being 14 earlier. I have that same experience. Like, I've been in the Rainbow recently, and like, I go in there, I'm like, how the fuck at 15 years old was I in the Rainbow? And then I think about it, I'm like, oh yeah, you'd go to a gig and then you'd walk with the band over, and like, it was just like that, and you're sitting there hanging out with Lemmy at the Rainbow, type of thing, at 15 years old. And it's weird looking back on it, because at the time it was just really cool, but you didn't realize how cool it was. Right.
I mean, I couldn't have, it was just a part of life. I mean, I remember discovering the Bad Brains when I was, a very middling teenager, and they were just a local band. I never
right.
couldn't have even understood the value that they had. I just knew that I loved them, and I couldn't understand why I liked them as much as I liked Rush.
Yeah.
But and I saw this, the Stray Cats back then when they were called the Tomcats. They used to rehearse at this little studio on Avenue B called Tukasa. And I remember when I first heard about them, somebody was telling me, "Oh yeah, there's this band that rehearses over at Tukasa. There's just 3 of them, and one of them stands up while he plays the drums, and they look like cowboys or something." And and I went and saw them in Max's Kansas City, and it was, just you couldn't throw a rock without hitting an extraordinarily talented musician back then. There was just so many. You'd look down the bar and you'd see Rick Rubin sitting there, or Pete Steele used to come and watch me DJ at King Tut's Wawa Hut, and you'd see HR walking through Tompkins Square Park reading the Bible.
And did you watch that Beatles thing? Speaking, I think it was Rick Rubin and Paul McCartney did this thing recently, and they're playing.
I saw the ads for it, but I haven't seen it.
Yeah, so they're playing music and listening to like different Beatles songs.
Right. And
Paul McCartney, at one point, there's one song that comes on. He's like, back then I was just playing with my bloke John, and he goes, and now I'm like, oh my God, I was playing with John Lennon. Like it was like he's saying like, I'm fanboying right now. Like he was fanboying out that he was playing with John Lennon, but like he didn't really think about it back then. It was just his friend.
I mean, I can totally identify that. I remember at one point after the Cro-Mags had broken up and I had started this other band, and we'd written a bunch of songs and we couldn't find a singer. We were brainstorming on what to do. And, Pete Steele was just a friend of ours. And so I called up Pete and I was like, listen, we have an entire album written and we just want to record it. Would you consider coming down and listening to it? And Pete, I don't know how he got there. I guess he drove his crazy car over there, but to Elmhurst, Queens, to where my friend who was playing guitar in that band lived with his mom and his grandma. And he had this little teeny bedroom that was like so small that the drums we had set up in his little bedroom, it was just the snare drum, a ride cymbal, the hi-hat and the bass drum and the stool. And that was between, like, you could barely fit that between the bed and the wall. And Pete came in and he climbed up on his like little single bed and stood in the corner with his head up by the ceiling. And, we were all like, I was sitting on this guy's desk, we were like literally all on top of each other. And Pete just took out his little notebook and we played basically an hour's worth of music instrumentally while Pete took notes. And sometimes when we finished songs, Pete would say, what were you thinking when you wrote that? Like, so he can get a vibe of what to write down. Because because it was his job to write the lyrics and stuff. And then, you know, we spent the afternoon playing songs for him and asking his crazy questions, and then he went off. And ultimately, we never made that record. But to me, you know, looking back now, if I tell this story, I'm telling this story about how crazy it was that Pete Steele was in my friend's basement in my friend's mom's house,
right?
Opposed to just this guy that was just a pal of ours. And there were so many people like
cool.
that. You know, like, you know, just even like, you know, different kinds of success. Like one of the guys that we hung out with every night was Kamal from the Jerky Boys. And the Jerky Boys was you know, a worldwide cultural phenomenon.
Yeah.
But he was just one of the guys that hung out on the street with us, and he would come in sometimes and he would say, "Oh, you should come over and listen to these tapes I've been making." And we just, you know, they were always funny, but we thought, you know, what are you going to do with this? And then like 2 years later, he was world famous and making a movie with Disney.
Right.
You know, there was just something magnetic about that neighborhood, you know, where so many people came out of it, you know, White Zombie, Beastie Boys, the Jerky Boys, producers, actors. It's just such a strange thing. You know, I often say, like, if I could go back to that street corner, I would, you know, to see all these extraordinary people that were famous, but they weren't famous then.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's so strange that so many of those people went off to make their mark, and we all gravitated to each other with no inkling of what the future might bring.
And the cool thing is nobody back then did it for that reason. You know, like you did it because of the love of the art. You know, I think sometimes, well, a lot of times nowadays, you have these artists that they're doing it to get famous instead of because they just love the art, and that's why they get famous, is because they just love the art and they don't care.
I mean, yeah, that's today's culture. It's a culture of fame without accomplishment. You know, right. I was having a conversation with somebody earlier about, you know, they were saying, you know, you put so much work into your record and into your videos, like, you know, because the discussion was like about how, you know, world-class production isn't not only required anymore, but it's just something that shouldn't be bothered with, because you won't, because it, you know, making a Seal album or making a Michael Jackson album, that kind of thing is just not necessary, because it'll never sell those kinds of records or something like that. And then they said, you know, they use this phrase, you know, you got to get more ears on your music. And I was like, oh, that's such a modern streaming service indoctrination technique, you know,
right?
The idea of getting more ears listening to your music. Like, so basically, you know, get your music on every streaming service there is possible, so you can get as many ears on your music. That's success. That's how people, the music business is trying to indoctrinate you into believing success is achieved now. But I would certainly rather have much less ears on my music and not give it away for free.
Yeah.
You know, and not make streaming services billions of dollars while the artist makes nothing, because they're convinced they have to get more ears on their music.
Yeah, even like competitors of mine, you know, doing streaming radio and stuff like that, I run into people all the time that they just think that they shouldn't have to pay. Like, I pay for licensing, royalties, and everything, because I see what artists go through. I always did. And like, you're working, you deserve to get paid. And like, these other people sometimes are like, well, they should just let me play their music. And I'm like, no, they shouldn't. Maybe you should pay your royalties and get licensed to play their music. You know, like, I mean, they're using it to benefit. So I think everybody should benefit. Like, you know, if I'm going to benefit, you as the artist should benefit too. And I hate to say it, Lars was right.
And the bottom line to our conversation was, I feel like I have a world-class production on that AGGROS record behind you.
You do.
And certainly the music videos are world-class. You know, because I feel like that's my job as a musician, to take my music to its final stages where it will live forever as best it possibly can. And I do that for myself. Yeah. You know, I don't do it for all the ears that might be on it on the streaming service. I don't care about 1 million streams that are going to make, you know, Spotify $1 billion. I care about the people who actually like my music, the fetishists who listen and, you know, seek out and and want to listen to it. So I make it the best I can for myself first, and then for them. And I'm not interested in the casual listener. I'm only concerned with the fetishist, the fanatic, and one of us.
And that's and again, that's OG, because like that's how it was. And like looking at this video, Skateboard Fight, like it's the type of video that you can't just put the video on and go about what you're doing. I think you really got to sit there and just watch it, because the creativity that you put into it. Plus, I want that skateboard, by the way, because that was badass with the wheels lighting up, and then the kicktail lighting up and stuff and sparking. I need that.
I had to make skateboarding more cinematic than just, I had to make it kind of like that dream thing I said, of my memories.
Right.
And the same thing with the guitar duel. It's amazing how so much of this developed as I was going, because I had recorded the song completely without thought of there being a guitar solo. I was almost ready to release the album when I just thought of Chuck Lenahan from the Crumbsuckers, and how, he's another one of those people that I knew, one of these extraordinary people that I knew from my youth. And I realized, I could just call him up and see what he could do. And it was the first song I sent him. And I sent him the song, and I hadn't spoken to him in like over a decade.
Wow.
And I sent him the song, and I wrote, try playing a solo at 2 minutes, or 1 minute 30 seconds, and play through that whole section. And he sent me back some tracks the next day, and it was one of those things where like he started playing, he was playing something very strong, and then laid back a little bit, and then he played something really strong, and then he laid back a little bit. And so I was listening to it, and I thought, yeah, I just don't really like this section. I don't like this section. I don't like this section. I don't like this section. And I sent it back to Chuck. I was like, fill in these blanks. And he was like, oh, I'm going to be on tour for like 2 weeks, so give me 2 weeks to do it. I was like, all right. But I was in the studio the next day, and my engineer was like, he goes, well, these gaps that are in here are they're very symmetrical. Like he plays and there's a blank spot, then he plays, there's a blank spot, he plays, there's a blank spot. He goes, why don't you just fill in those blanks? And I was like, oh, that would be cool, like an old style Judas Priest, Joe Perry, Steven Tyler. Joe Perry, Brad Whitford duel. And so I just laid in the tracks, and then I sent them to Chuck, and I was like, okay, don't do anything. And I love the fact that we had that. And then of course, immediately I thought, and I'd already started to shoot the video,
Wow.
because that's the way I do. I just shoot little things, but I abandoned everything that I shot. Like I almost shot an entire video. I shot it on Halloween night one night. I thought it'd be crazy to go out on Halloween night. I abandoned the entire thing. Started from scratch. I was like, okay, I'm going to go out and shoot this guitar duel with Chuck, and then see it go from there. But I love the fact that the song developed that way. And then, of course, when that solo was so much fun and so cool, I invited Chuck to come and play on most of the rest of the album.
See, that's so cool, because that's the creative process right there. Just like when you're really into the creative process, it takes a life of its own, instead of what I like to call nowadays, some bands use like an algebraic equation to make their music. Like there's no thought whatsoever. It's like they plug in a formula.
And unfortunately, so many bands are still shackled by the record deal business of getting it together, having them set up the parameters of how you record by giving you the exact just enough to be able to make the record, in a short amount of time. So you have to go in there and just like bust it out, and there's little or no time for whimsy or improvisation or creativity in the studio. You have to be ready when you get in there, which I guess people are accustomed to, but it's not the way I do it at all. I took my time so much making this record. I changed it. I took entire songs, cut them in half, put sections from other songs together. I just weaved it all together with whimsy and just a lot of thought and And it really is more of an art piece than a record, because it came together very much the way I would make a music video or drawing or anything.
And that's the way it should be. I think, to me, music is all of the art, not like you got an album back in the day and it was a complete experience. It wasn't just the music. It was the album cover. It was the artwork. It was the lyrics. It was everything involved. And see, that's what's cool about it. And I think, how do people, first of all, connect to you guys on socials, but more importantly too, how do they, as they can see me right there, get the album now? How do they do that?
Well, if you're in the United States, let me just quickly get this. Which
is, by the way, it's funny you should say that, because right now I'm in Costa Rica.
Oh, nice.
And
well,
there's a skateboard park a block away from me.
That's nice.
Yeah.
But if the record that you have behind you, which is red transparent vinyl, in that awesome album cover by Andrew Montserrat, you can get that on www.aggros.nyc. That's our store. We have CDs there, and you can also get a digital album on Bandcamp. Bandcamp is very cool. But if you're in Europe, you can also get vinyl on our Bandcamp page, and there are 3 different vinyl variants in Europe. There's Ultra Clear, Orange Crush, and Blood Red. Or you can go to Cortex. There's quite a few places in Europe to get it. Reality Records. But you know, if you're in the United States, please get it from me, buy direct from the artist. Aggros.nyc. And those socials that you mentioned, I actually have them up on my screen. So Facebook / Parris Mayhew, or Parris.Mayhew. And at Facebook, Aggros Army, AGGROS Army. Instagram is Parris Mayhew. Instagram is also _Aggros. Yeah.
Nice.
And feel free to befriend me on there. I'm always happy to answer questions about the Aggros and my high school band if if I'm in the mood.
Speaking of high school bands, okay, so going back to, you know, weird things that happen. I was a freshman in high school, and this band played in the high school gymnasium like during the school day. Called Oingo Boingo.
Wow.
How about that? Like, who would have ever thought Danny Elfman would become, oh my God, the monster of all movie composers? Like,
that's right.
All I was doing is sitting there jamming out to Only a Lad in my gym class. So cool stuff. Great music.
You know, you're talking about the album experience that, you know, I'm looking at the album behind you, you know, and it's, you know, I did everything I could to make that vinyl experience the same way it was with me. Like, I spoke to the many vinyl manufacturers and I said, I want this record to be as nice and as quality as any Rush or Prince or any big record that I ever had, a Sade record. I want people to hold this in their hand, and I want them to feel like it's the best quality they can possibly get. The inner sleeve is almost the same, you know, card stock as the cover, and it's full color, and I got all colored vinyl, and I got 2 great artists to do the front and the back cover, and you know, full liner notes and the whole deal. And of course, I made the best album I could possibly make. I have a lot of great musicians playing on it. Got a lot of great drummers. Roy Mayorga from Stone Sour plays on one track, Fear of You Mirror. That was a great day recording that song. And yeah, man, I worked on that record harder than I have on anything in my life, except for maybe the videos. When you watch the videos, they are a complete experience, and they are fun to watch. And you got to take into consideration, I shot 90% of these videos by myself.
Wow.
They're basically selfies.
I love it.
You know, I work in television, and, you know, I just know exactly what I'm going to get and what I'm going to see. So I can set up a camera and use my imagination of what's going to be in the frame. So when you're seeing all this stuff of me skateboarding around and jumping around with the guitar, you know, a lot of times there's nobody behind the camera.
Wow. That's impressive because it looks like a high production video. For anybody goes and sees it, you'll see it looks like a high production video, and that says a lot. But you're a badass artist, so that's what it is.
Well, thank you, Dean. Thank you very much.
You got it. And thank you for giving us such great music, and thanks for being on the Adventures of Pipeman.
I appreciate it, Dean. I appreciate you inviting me back. I appreciate you sharing your audience with me. And I hope you all listen to the AGGROS and watch the videos and enjoy it. What's up? This is Parris Mayhew from the AGGROS, and you're listening to Pipeman on W4CY Radio.
Thank you for listening to the Adventures of Pipeman on W4CY Radio.